By the way,
Okay, everybody, I just wanted to say hi because we're recording now. And Don Baker has graciously come again to give us a talk about some recent translation and research he's done on Dasan. And we're very, very happy to have him. And you can screen share at will, Don. So let's give Don a big welcome. Yay, Don.
Thanks. Let me get the screen, share screen. Is it work? Oh, here we go. Can you see my slides?
Yeah, we can.
Let me play the slideshow. Okay, there we are. Everything's okay? Yep.
Looks good.
Okay, rather than talk about my recent book, which might bore you all, I thought I'd talk about the guy who wrote the text that I translated, plus his brothers. And I'd advertise this as
You're muted, John.
Hmm?
You were muted there for a second, I think.
Oh, am I still muted?
Nope, we can hear you now.
Oh, okay. I'm actually going to talk about briefly the fourth brother. There was this amazing family. Chung Hyun was the oldest. He's the stepbrother to the other three because his mother died after he was born. His father married again. He was married to a sister of a guy named Lee Byuk, who if you studied the Korean Catholic Church, it's very important. Lee Byuk is the first Korean who asked a friend of his named Lee Sung-hun, who's married to one of the Chung sisters, asked Lee Sung-hun when he went to Beijing to pick up some Catholic books, and Lee Sung-hun got baptized there and came back as a Catholic. And that began the troubles for the rest of the Chung family. Chung Hyun never became a Catholic, but his daughter married a guy named Hwang Sa-young, and I published a book a few years ago about Hwang. Hwang was a young Catholic who, in 1801, when the government started killing Catholics in large numbers, he tried to write a letter to be sent to the bishop in Beijing detailing the persecution and asking that the Europeans send a fleet with a lot of cannon to Korea to stop the government from killing Catholics. Well, his letter was intercepted, and Hwang got what's called a death by slicing. We're hoping that they cut his head off first. If they're nice, they do that. Otherwise, they start from the extremities and get closer and closer to you. And so that's one of the brothers, but the other three are much more interesting. There's Chung Yak-jun, Chung Yak-jong, and Chung Yak-yong. And Chung Yak-yong is the one I published the book about, but they're all three interesting guys. And how many of you still can read Korean? This is the family chart. This is Chung Yak-hyun, and here he is, his Lee Byuk's over here, married into the family, but then Chung Yak-hyun, daughter married Hwang Sa-young, and then he was martyred, Sun Gyeong in red there, and his wife was exiled, and then some other children were also martyred. And then you have, I know, they killed hundreds, actually thousands of Catholics in the 19th century. Chung Yak-jun was exiled. We'll talk about his exile. Chung Yak-jong was martyred in 1801. His wife was later martyred, as were two of his sons. And then Chung Yak-yong was also exiled. That's the guy whose writings I translated. And then they had a sister who married a guy named Lee Sung-hun, who was the one who was baptized in Beijing and came back, and he was martyred in 1801. So a lot of tragic history. Lee Sung-hun, by the way, later on, his son was martyred, his grandson was martyred, and two great-grandsons were martyred. So they suffered a lot for becoming Catholics at a time when Catholicism was not legal in Korea. But let me start with Yagyeong. Tasan is usually called. I'm going to use the old romanization system. I don't like the new one with the D-A-S-A-N. I don't like that. Maybe people want to say Dasan. Here's a statue of him at his home, outside of, not far from Seoul, Namyangju. And he's considered one of the greatest philosophers in Korean history. But first I want to talk about how they got exposed to Catholicism. 1784, Tasan and his brothers were all young men in their 20s. Tasan was the youngest, by the way. Lee Byuk, sister, had been married to Yak-hyun, and she had died, so they had a kind of family memorial for her, and they had to travel on a boat up the Han River a bit for the memorial service. On the way back, Ibiak said, by the way, here's some Catholic books Lee Sung-hun brought back from Beijing. And he showed them to these guys, and they thought these are interesting. There's no priest in Korea, no missionaries. They were converted by books. Okay, and Tasan said he found them fascinating. Yak Jong joined later. It was Yak Yong and Yak Jun who started getting interested in Catholicism in 1784. 3 years later, Yak Jong joined that community. What's interesting, he's the last one to become a Catholic. He's the one who remained faithful. Same year, his cousin named Yun Chi-jung joined. And Yun is the man who was executed in 1791 because his mother had died and he'd been told by the bishop in Beijing that the Pope had forbidden using an ancestral tablet for an ancestral memorial service. So he didn't have a tablet. And in a memorial service in his own home, but that was reported and he was executed, which is why Yak Yong and Yak Yun, I think, left the church at that time. Okay. So imagine that poor guy, he's mourning his mother in his own way in the countryside down near Jeonju, and he gets reported to the local district magistrate, who reports him to Seoul, and he gets his head chopped off. Okay. Here's Ibiak, and here's Lee Sung-hun came back from China with the baptismal name of Peter. So it's Peter Lee Sung-hun. Ibiak, by the way, was the one who asked Lee Sung-hun to bring back Catholic books. Ibiak's father found out Ibiak was getting involved with this Catholic community in 1785. He said that he would stop eating and die of starvation if Ibiak kept doing that, kept being a Catholic. So Ibiak withdrew from the church and then died 2 years later. Catholics say he died of a broken heart. Other people say he died of cholera. So you can have all the family histories here. And again, Lee Sung-hun married a sister of the Chung brothers. All the Chung brothers are the center of all of this. And Yun Chi-chung is related to the Chung brothers through the mother of Tasan. Here's, if none of you, maybe, how many of you have seen Chesa? Okay, Frank has. Here's the spirit tablets. And, you know, they bow before it. And the stupid people in Rome thought bowing before it meant you were adoring it and worshiping it, and therefore it was idolatry. I mean, Koreans bow, right? That's what you do when you meet somebody, you know. It's true you offer the food to the spirits, but then you enjoy it yourself afterwards. But anyway, for the simple crime of not having spirit tablets like this for his mother, Yun Chi-chung was died and set a precedent for the next 80 years. Catholics were killed for, among other things, not having spirit tablets. The eldest son, of course, has a spirit tablet. It's good that Yak Hyun was not a Catholic. He was able to survive. He was the one in charge of the spirit tablets. So again, in 1791, when Yun Chi-chung was killed, Yak Yong and Yak Hyun, they cut off their ties to the Catholic community. Tasan wrote as king. He said, when I heard that Catholics weren't allowed to have a spirit tablet, I was chilled to my bones. I think he was scared for his life because his cousin had just been killed. But Yak Jong again stayed a Catholic. And Tasan entered government service. He passed #1 on the civil service exam. He slowly rose to the ranks. By the way, the next year, Yak Jun also did well on the civil service exam. And that was a problem because people are promoted on the basis of seniority. And at one point, it looked like Yak Jun was going to be working under his younger brother, Yak Yong. So they had to switch jobs. But the king at that time, Jeongjo, knew that Tasan was really talented. So he wanted to take, even though Tasan was being accused of being a Catholic, being associated with the Catholics, the king wanted to keep him around. How many have been to the Suwon, the Hwasong fortress there? Tasan designed that. The king gave him a book written by a missionary in China and about various construction equipment he could use, and Tasan used that to design that fortress. So Tasan was okay until King Jeongjo died in 1800. And that's when a major anti-Catholic persecution took out. And Tasan was sent into exile for 18 years. And Yak Jun was also exiled. And Yak Jong had his head cut off. Okay, so here's the Hwasong Fortress, for those who haven't seen it. There's no other fortress like this in Korea built, right? It was unusual. And here's one of the devices that Tasan constructed and to build the fortress, to lift the stones. He wrote a little essay on this. A little short essay that I translated for the source book of Korean civilization. Okay, so Tasan was exiled this time down in Gangjin, why do they always exile people to the Chola province? That's where I was in Peace Corps. Was I exiled? I like Chola. Best food in Korea, right? His family had to stay in Seoul. He couldn't have his family with him. They could send him food, which they did. And he stayed in the back room of a bar, but eventually found a hut, a 2-room hut. And he was lucky that one of his mother's ancestors had also been exiled there and had left a library behind. So Tasan had a lot of reading material, and he wrote and wrote and wrote. So I call it an 18-year sabbatical because his family wasn't there. By the way, one of the sad stories about Tasan, he was in exile for a couple of years when he got a letter from his wife. We don't have her letter, we have his reply. She wrote him to say that his youngest son, who had been like 2 years old when Tasan was sitting in exile, had died. By the way, 6 of Tasan's children died before the age of 5. 6 out of 9 died before the age of 5. Anyway, he wrote back to his wife saying, "Oh, I remember seeing the last time I saw my youngest son. You were holding him. You could walk with him to the outskirts of the city, but then you had to stop, and you were trying to tell the little boy, say goodbye to Appa, Appa." And that was, Tasan said, "I never thought I'd never see him again." Very sad letter. Anyway, Tasan means Tea Mountain because he built his hut at the foot of what Koreans call, I live in British Columbia, we call them hills, not mountains, but they call them mountains in Korea, right? He grew some tea on that mountain. He was lucky enough to be near a temple, Paegangsa, which is an easy walk. I've walked it, where a monk was experimenting with growing tea in a tea ceremony of sorts. So Tasan really got into tea, so he called himself Tea Mountain, Tasan. Tasan wrote only in Chinese. I assume he wrote his wife in Korean. We don't have those letters. We have the Chinese maybe translation of them. Or maybe he wrote in Chinese and maybe his wife could read Chinese. Some women did. I have 37 volumes of his writings in my library here, all in Chinese. Not a single word by Tasan in Korean. Not a single word. And he wrote on an incredible variety of subjects. He wrote on philosophy. My latest book was How to Be Moral, about his moral philosophy. He wrote on geography, ancient and the geography of his time. He wrote on history. He wrote on medicine. One of my first articles on him was measles, smallpox, and Jeongjo. He wrote about measles and smallpox. He wrote some famous books on government administration. And of course, he wrote poetry. And he wrote obituaries for a number of his friends and relatives, except for Jeongjo. He didn't write an obituary for Jeongjo because he said Jeongjo caused us trouble by staying a Catholic. Okay. He wrote his own tombstone inscription. That's what he calls it. It's epitaph. It's 62 pages of Chinese, so it's a pretty big tombstone. Again, his collected works are in 37 volumes. And so again, there's been a translation of one of his works on government. It's called Admonition for Governing the People. The translator made some interesting mistakes in the original text. I looked it over. Tasan was discussing all aspects of government, including punishment. He was talking about the kang, the thing put people's head to a piece of wood, a board, and they have trouble eating. But the vernacular word for that is kal. And so the translator said they put a knife around their neck. I said, no, not a knife. Okay. Okay, let me go back to that. Oops. Oops, let me go again. One more. Next slide. I went. Okay, there we go. Okay. Okay. And again, he wrote on measles. This is not the Western method of smallpox and immunization. Tasan had heard that in China, they had a way of preventing smallpox known as sniffing scabs. I used to tell, when I taught a class that ended around noon, I often finish the class with this story. You find somebody who has smallpox, they're getting over it, they got a little scab, you pick it off and it immunizes you. That's what he said. I've never tried it. In his philosophical works, one of the ones I just translated, I mean, he wrote a lot. I translated one small part. He denies, he says he left the Catholic Church, but he obviously still believes in a personal God. It's quite clear. And he says that he doesn't call him the Catholic word for God. He uses an old Chinese word, Sangje in Korean, Sangde in Chinese. He says that you need to believe in a God to inspire you to exert the effort necessary to live a moral life. It's not easy to be moral. If you believe in a God, then you'll be inspired to act properly. Now, he doesn't talk about heaven or hell. Confucianism is sometimes called a philosophy of shame. You'll feel ashamed knowing God is watching you. And he says, God can see even what you're thinking, so be very careful. Be always apprehensive every minute of the day. Okay. Here's his writings. These are in my home library. There's 37 volumes. It's called Yeonang Chunsa. Yeah, yeah. And here's what it looks like in the original. Okay. This stuff, he was a criminal, right? He was exiled. So his stuff wasn't really published until the 20th century. And that's when people decided that he was a modern thinker. And they call him a practical learning scholar, Shilakpa. He had some practical aspects, but also some impractical aspects. But I've only read a small portion. The part that I translated is one small part of volume 6. And that took up a whole book to translate it. So it's massive. It's all online, of course. Here's where he did his writing. Here's his little hut down in Kangjin. Right? Yeah. By the way, the calligraphy there is by King Jeongjo, who was a great calligrapher in the 19th century, who stopped by there on his way into exile in Jeju. Here he is, Tasan. Hey, Tasan had a little pond there to get his water for his tea. And here's what he supposedly looked like. He lived to be an old man. He and his wife were married for 60 years. They married when they were 15 years old, and they both died when they were 75. Amazing. It didn't happen that much back then. He supposedly, we thought, didn't have a concubine, although now we suspect he had a concubine when he was down there in Kangjin for 18 years. But and she did not accompany him back to his home in Namyangju. Tasan was released from exile in 1818. He lived in 1836, never got back into government. He tried a couple of times, but always people said, no, he's a Catholic. We can't trust him. So he had hoped that he and Yakjun would be together again. They went to exile together. They walked down to Naju, which I know well. My Peace Corps site was Gwangju. They walked to Naju and they had to separate. Tasan had to go south, and Yakjun was exiled to an island to the west, Huksando. And so Yakjun died in 1816, so they never met again. They were both in exile then. Tasan wrote his nephew, Yakjun's son, after he heard that his brother had died. He says, I used to go out, because Tasan's home was on the exile home was on the coast. I'd go out and look over the waters to see if I could see Huksando, thinking I want to meet my brother again. He said, I remember the last time we were together, as we were walking to go into exile, we got to Naju, and we got royally drunk that night, and then said goodbye the next morning. Pretty sad. Okay. So, again, and also Tasan said to his nephew, your brother was the only person who understood my philosophy. Who's going to read my writings now that he's gone? It's pretty sad. We have a lot of Tasan's letters in his collected works, by the way. Here's where they were, the exile. Tasan's down here in Kangjin. I got this from a website that uses the new romanization system, right, with the G instead of the K. You've been to Kangjin, you know, they're also famous for their pottery, right? Back in the Korea dynasty. Here's where Reporter Yakjun was. Why he got exiled to a remote island, I don't know. I mean, Tasan had it pretty good. He had tea, he had a library. Yakjun is way out here. You know? And I guess Yakjun could send letters back and forth. Boats would occasionally travel from Huksando to the mainland, but it was tough. Okay. Now, originally there was a movie made about Yakjun. When I was flying to Korea a couple of years ago, last year, I guess it was, I couldn't go during the pandemic. I saw a movie listed, there's a book of fish. I thought, well, what's a movie called A Book of Fish? So I checked out the description, and it's about Jeong Yakjun, who wrote a book about fish. And this is what he looked like. Oops, let me go back. And this is not the house he lived in. This is the house they reconstructed for the movie. Okay, but he didn't have, you know, a very small place, basically, right? Just like his brother in exile. Okay. Now, what are you going to do if you're a scholar or stuck on an island? You're going to study fish. That's what he did. He taught some of the young people there to read Chinese because they weren't very educated on this island. And he again studied fish. Koreans call this the first book of modern biology. It's been translated into English, by the way, recently by a professor at Iwa. He describes he didn't fish himself, as far as I know. He, went out on the shore, but the island's mainly fishermen. So it asked them about the fish they brought in, take a look at them. He describes the fish in detail, where they can be found, when the best time of the year to catch them, what they taste like, how you cook them. He discusses whales, shrimp, jellyfish, hesam. I can't stand hesam. Anybody here eat hesam? I never learned to eat hesam. And skate, hongo. I never learned to eat that either, even though I'm a Gwangju person. And even discusses seaweed. It's, I mean, what are you going to do when you're on an island for 16 years, right? Okay. Again, the film is called A Book of Fish. So it's actually a pretty good film. It's actually historically accurate. Well, they have him living with a middle-aged woman he met there. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. They had to have a love interest, right? But he was there 16 years and without his wife, so it's possible. But the rest of it is pretty accurate. And Huksan-do has now built an exile park. I'm serious. So you can go and see where Yakjun was in exile. He wasn't the only one exiled there. They have a statue of him here, looking very scholarly. And here's, again, written in Chinese, Osan Obo is what it's called. So Chasan Obo, when you read the Chinese characters there. And so here's what he had to say about skate, by the way. I looked through it, thought the interesting comments he made. He says, sometimes the female skate stands still, like frozen when it's caught on a hook when a fisherman's going after it. The male holds on to the female and then mates with her. So when the fisherman pulls them in, the two come out of the water together. So Yakjun, being a Confucian moralist, said, the female dies for its food and the male dies for its lewdness. He said it's a good lesson for those who indulge in, that's the word, that indulge in sexual pleasure. And he tells you what to do with hongo. He said if you get a boil in your chest and stomach and you suffer for a long time, a hot soup of fermented skate will help you push the dirty and bad out of your body. But also it'll make you comfortable with alcoholic drinking, which may be why the few occasions I've had hongo, it's always been with alcohol. People in Gwangju love hongo. When they want to be nice to me, they buy me a meal of hongo, and I can't stand this stuff. It's really gritty. It's really hard chewy, Anyway, if you want to read the whole book of Fish, No Sang Ho is written, called Neo-Confucianism and Science in Korea. Here's the Exile Park. Yubei, a park of exile culture, it's called. And here's a list of all the people who've been exiled on that poor island. It's way out there. It's like a 2-hour ferry ride from Mokpo. It's way out there. You're almost in China when you're Huksan-do. Okay. And again, here's some of the things you see when you go to the exile park. Right? Okay. And he had another interesting experience that I only found out about 4 years ago. So he was exiled in 1801. In 1805, a fisherman showed up who'd been away for 5 years, a guy named Mun Sun-duk. Mun had gotten on a boat to try to sell some hongo, some skate, and he got caught up in a storm, and he was blown away and landed in Okinawa, where he was stuck for like a year and a half. Finally, he thought he got a boat going to China where he could get home to Korea. Then he got another storm, and he sailed to the Philippines. This is all true. He stayed there another year and a half or 2 years. Finally, he got a boat to Macau, and then he walked back to Korea and then got a boat to Huksan-do. And he comes in and this guy's illiterate, but he has a story to tell. So Cheung Yak-jun wrote down his story, and it was kind of lost in the family archives, I guess. It was discovered around 1960 or so. And we know this guy's real because some Filipino sailors somehow got shipwrecked on Jeju-do, and the government brought Mun in to translate for him. It's in the Shilluk, it's in the records. Fascinating guy. And here's this Korean, he describes Macau's very European looking. He was controlled by the Portuguese. He's trying to describe the Koreans like big churches and so on. People, what are you talking about, guy? They had no clue. And he learned to speak a little bit of Okinawan and a little bit of Tagalog. But he was illiterate. He could speak it, but couldn't write it. Okay. Now here's King Jeongjo. He's the one who stayed a faithful Catholic, even though he's the last one to be baptized. His name is Augustine. He's not a saint yet. His son is. He is. The Catholic system is 4-year saints, you're blessed. He's blessed Augustine Jeongjo, and he wrote in Hangul. He wrote a catechism. Now, a Chinese priest had been smuggled into Korea in 1895, and he and Jeongjo got together and wrote this catechism, which was still used by Korean Catholics until the 1930s, right? And it's straight Catholic doctrine. He had the least Confucian training of his brothers. He never even bothered to take the civil service exam. Okay? He actually had been a Taoist. Oops, let me go back again. Remember Hwang Sa-young, who was married to the daughter of Chung Yak-hyun? Well, when Hwang Sa-young wrote his silk letter, it's called, he wrote it on a piece of silk to be hidden in clothing and smuggled out. He talks about all the Catholics who were martyred, including Augustine Jeongjo. And he talks about the fact that when Jeongjo was younger, before he encountered Catholicism, he was interested in Taoism. Taoism promised you could live forever. And he thought, that's a pretty good idea. But then he talks to the Buddhists who said, well, no, the world goes to a big bang, then a big collapse, another big bang, another big collapse. He thought, you can't live forever if the world's always collapsing on you. Then the Catholics said, don't worry about it. You can escape this world and live forever in heaven. He said, that's like a good idea. And so he became a very sincere Catholic. And when his brothers defected or apostatized and his cousin was killed, he went underground and he kept the church going for 10 years until he was finally caught in 1801. By the way, Tasan was grateful because when he was caught, they found a little note he wrote saying to his fellow Catholics, don't talk to my brothers Yak Yong and Yak Jun because they're no longer Catholics. Don't trust them. And that saved them. That's why they weren't executed. Okay. And being a good Catholic, he wanted to go to heaven. He welcomed martyrdom. There's a phenomenon in the Korean Catholic Church in the 19th century called voluntary martyrdom. People actually turning themselves in to be martyred. Well, he didn't turn himself in, he was captured. But he seemed to be enjoying the idea of being martyred. He was going to be beheaded, but he didn't get the slicing death. He got just beheaded. When they put him on a cart to take him to be executed, he executed people outside the city walls, by the way. You don't want to do it in the city walls. And he's telling the people, don't laugh at me, we are born into this world to glorify the Lord of heaven. That's the Catholic word for God. But when we come before God after death, we cry no more, we'll rejoice. So, but you are going to go to hell. So you think we're in a bad shape now? We're in better shape than you. And supposedly, it says down here, this is from Hwang Sa-young's letter. Hwang got this from an eyewitness. He didn't witness it himself. Supposedly, Chung Yak-jong is sitting up straight, and they try to chop off his head, and it didn't go all the way through, so it kind of fell over a little bit. They sat back up again and said, try again. And they did. And they got it in the second time. Okay. Has anybody been to Tasan in Seoul? That's a Catholic martyrdom site. It's called Tasan. You know what that means, right? Chopping off Heads Mountain. I don't know if that's where he was killed or not, but anyway. The Chung brothers today, Tasan, there's a Tasan Road in Seoul. There's a Yulgok Road and Taegye Road, two great Confucian philosophers. Tasan's not on the money like Yulgok and Taegye, but there is a Tasan Road. And if you go towards the library on Namsan, you'll pass by a statue of Tasan. Okay. And he's known as the ultimate practical learning scholar. People want to say that, oh, only Tasan, if the government had used his talent, Korea would have modernized enough to prevent Japanese takeover. I'm not quite sure about that. Tasan didn't know anything about industrialization, for example. He believed in developing a more just agricultural economy by redistributing the land. So in North Korea, they call him a proto-Marxist. There are these two academic societies in the RLK dedicated to Tasan. One used to be headed by a descendant of Tasan who was chief of police, nationally chief of police under Chun Du-hwan. The other was headed by a scholar of Tasan who was in jail under Chun Du-hwan. So quite interesting when the two groups try to get together. They're totally different takes on Tasan. I work with both, but anyway. And so there have been a lot of best-selling novels about Tasan, movies about Tasan, TV shows about Tasan. He always is seen walking very straight and firm with a smile. The Tasan I read was not happy much of the time because his children were dying, his brothers were dying, his brother was dying, he was in exile. But that's not how you see him in the movies. So Yak Jun has only become better known in recent years when they found out about this book of fish. People say, hey, we got a modern biologist. Koreans want to look for roots of modernity in the Joseon dynasty, right? And Tasan knew how to build a modern fortress, so he's modern. Yakjun is modern because he wrote about fish, okay? And Catholics love Yakjong. He's probably going to be canonized, but he need a miracle for this. His son, Jung Hasang, has already been canonized. He's Saint Paul Jung Hasang. Oops, let me go back. Oops. If most communities in North America, if they have one Catholic Korean church, it'll be called Kim Dae-gun. Kim Dae-gun was the first Korean priest who was martyred. If there's two churches, the second one will probably be called Jung Hasang Church. They're very proud of him. So probably when Yakjong gets canonized, there'll be Yakjong churches as well. So these are three brothers who went separate ways. I published a book chapter many years ago about how religion separated a family, because Yakjong and Yakjun really resented the fact that Yakjong continued to be a Catholic, and therefore the whole family suffered. They believed they would not have been exiled if their brother had not been such a fervent Catholic. And so they were unhappy about that. But they're fascinating guys. I mean, one family. It's, again, a lot has been written about them. There's I think last bibliography I saw had like 2,000 scholarly articles on Tasan alone. Most of them in Korean. I've read quite a few in English. So I can stop sharing now, and I see Frank is still there.
I'm here.
Okay. I went through rather quickly. I thought you want to send pictures. Anybody been to that Exile Park? No.
Not yet.
When I went to the island many years ago, the Exile Park wasn't there yet. So only.
Did anybody see this? This is at the Vatican about the priest Kim that
Kim Dae-gun, yeah.
Just got revealed.
All right. He was an amazing guy. His letters have been translated into English now by Brother Anthony in Seoul. And he's a fascinating guy. It's too bad the Korean government didn't use him. He knew all these European languages, right? He studied in Macau and Manila. He could have really helped Korea deal with Westerners, but instead they killed him.
Wow, too bad.
Very he also, there's a talk there's another web group called the Chosun History Society has a talk in a couple of weeks about the map that Father Kim drew of Korea, again, to help the missionaries sneak into Korea. So it's a pretty accurate map. But, Kim Dae-gun was fascinating. I mean, his parents were killed martyred while he was studying to be a priest. And there was another Korean priest who followed him, Father Che, young up, who was able to survive for like 12 years in Korea without being caught, but he died of overwork. They said because he was exhausted. He was there were missionaries there by then, underground missionaries hiding. But their Korean was okay, but he was the native speaker of Korean, right? So he was running all over the country trying to do the things he needed to do with Catholics when you're a priest. And he got exhausted and died. They call him a martyr. They call Father Kim the martyr of blood because he was executed, and Father Che the white martyr because he died not by being killed, but he still gave his life for his church. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Hey, Don.
Yeah.
On the movie, The Book of Fishes, I had the same experience you did on a flight to Korea. I saw this odd title and wondered what it was. What'd you say, Frank?
I said Me 3. I saw that on an Asiana flight.
There you go. So it was an interesting movie, and as you said, it was quite accurate, and it has a feel of authenticity to it as it goes along. But the storyline involved teaching a young illiterate fisher boy who had a lot of promise, who brought him fishes all the time to analyze, and he taught that young man literacy, and the young man took and passed the exam. Is there any veracity to that?
I've never seen any. I haven't checked on that, but I haven't seen any record of that. No. And also, the movie also shows him maintaining his Catholic faith, which we have no evidence of. Although he wrote, Yakjun wrote from his island to Tasan and Kangjin saying, "I'm building a study calling it the Hall of Many Regrets. I have a lot of things I've done in my life that I regret." And the Catholics say, "Oh, he regretted apostatizing," but he's not that explicit about it. So But they had Mun Sung Duk in there in the movie, right? I believe.
Yeah.
And they have him writing the Book of Fish. So, but I know he taught people. Whether the kid went and passed the exam, I don't know.
Yeah, that feels like a bit of an exaggeration, but the rest of the story really has a good feel of veracity to it.
Yeah. I don't know anybody from Hook-Sando who ever became a government official, but
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
I haven't checked on it.
Yeah.
The calligrapher wrote at Bongwon-sa, the big temple next to the Coex Mall. They have a hall, with sutras and so forth, and he wrote the nameplate, for that hall. 3 days before he died, according to legend.
Okay.
After he returned from exile, it seems everybody was in exile.
And he got exiled to Jeju. Why do they exile people?
Right.
What's wrong? What's the problem with Jeju? Nice place to be exiled, right?
Right. I saw his hut in Jeju just by accident. My wife and I chanced upon it on a trip to Jeju.
Yeah, I saw it a long time ago as well. Yeah. And how he knew to stop off at Tasan's hut and say, "Let me write something for you," and then took off. I don't know.
Well, there's a monk, right? A famous monk. I can't Choi or something.
Choi,
who
that's
was
right.
in a temple there, and both of those men had connections to him.
Oh, okay, that's how. Shoei's the one who taught Tasan how to, I think, boil his tea.
Right.
Yeah. I'm teaching Joseon Dynasty history in this, starting in January. I've got 22 students. I want more. Should I say Joseon Dynasty through sex and violence? Maybe that'll. I don't know the question here.
I have something to say. My book is out.
Oh,
It's about the death of my son Kenzo in an unintentional shooting at a friend's house, and lawsuit that my wife and I brought against Beretta USA, and all that went on, and then I joined a coalition that passed laws requiring safety standards on handguns sold in California, and they helped bring down the rate of unintentional gun death by 2/3,
wow.
more or less. And then when the gun industry started selling those safer handguns in the rest of the country, the rate of unintentional gun death declined in the rest of the country as well. So it was a decades-long struggle to get that all done. And it's a story.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, it's good for you because you didn't know. My brother died of a gunshot wound when he was 23, my only brother. So I really appreciate the kind of work you're doing. Yeah. Back a long time ago, back in the 1970s, when I was a grad student. Yeah. I like being in Canada.
This will be in bookstores by October 3rd, and you can pre-order it, or you can order it now at Amazon or at something called bookshop.org at your local bookstore.
Okay.
If you want.
Great, Dick.
Congratulations, Griff.
Thanks very much.
That's quite a coup.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let me see.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to take off.
Okay, Griff. Thank you.
Thank you, Griff.
Congratulations. Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks, Dawn. Does anyone else have any questions? I'm going to stop the recording. Does